Welcome to Midlife Customs at Craig's Garage. In this video I work on the pinion assembly for the Ford 9-inch. If you like working on cars and watching DIY videos, then you should hit the subscribe button because that is what I post on this channel. Please take a quick minute to read this disclaimer. I am not a professional, nor do I claim to be. On the last video I show how I disassembled the third member and cleaned up all the parts. When it came to putting everything back together, I actually went ahead and bought a kit. And in this kit, basically it came with everything. New bearings, pinion nut, seals, bolts, ring and pinion, and the posi unit. It basically had everything I needed to put the rear end back together. I'll put a link in the description below the video. For now, all I had to do was remove the stuff I needed to reassemble the pinion assembly, which is the bearings, the races, the seal, the pinion nut, the retainer clip. After that, I was going to try to do this method of putting on the bearings that I seen from a series called Car Tapes, which is a very helpful series. And I do recommend to anybody that's about to rebuild a 9-inch should check that out. But in this video, he puts on the bearing by using a chisel and knocks it down by going around. It was working, and I absolutely think it could be done that way, but I just decided to go a different way. In the last video, I said I would hold on to the old pinion bearing, and the reason for that is if you cut off the case and grind down the center section of the sleeve, it can be used to press on the new bearing. So here I show how I did that by putting the sleeve of the bearing in a vise and using my Dremel to just grind down the inside. That way it could slide on and off the pinion when you're pressing on the new bearing. And that's basically what you want it to do, spin freely and come on and off with no problem. Luckily I own a press, so I'll be using that to put on the new bearings. After sliding on the old sleeve to press on the new bearings, I'll be using these rounded parts on the plates so that I could place the pinion in between it, line everything up, and press it through without anything getting caught or bound up. I just took my time making sure that everything was lined up, and every now and then after I started pressing it together, I would just make sure that the bearing would spin freely and nothing was getting caught or bound up. So like I said, I just take my time and just keep checking and making sure the bearing's spinning free. So after pressing it all together, the bearing should spin like this, but no problem. And here you can see how that sleeve just slips off, and this could be saved for the next time. Now on to the pinion support. I started by just using some of the gear oil to kind of lube the inner part of it so that the new race would slip in a little bit easier. And I did the same to the new race, just put a little bit of the gear oil. When it comes to pressing the new race in, I'm going to use the old race as kind of a guide, as a spacer, because it's the exact same size. And I'm also going to use some of these pieces from this kit. This thing comes in pretty handy for like pressing in bearings and seals and stuff. I'll put a link for it in the description below. So it comes with different sizes, and I just sized it up to see which one would fit the best and go with that. Here you can see kind of my setup, and the reason why I wanted to do this is because later I'll show how the actual ends of the race sit lower than the support. So by doing it this way, it actually countersinks it a bit. And there you have it, one side done. And what you want to make sure of is that on the back side of the race, it's actually bottoming out on this little groove here, and that it's not sitting back. So you want to check the gap on that and make sure it's nice and flush. Then I flipped a pinion support over, and with the same setup, I just did the same process, slowly pressing it in until it bottomed out. Here I show again how the race should bottom out on the back side of the little groove inside the pinion support. And I just wanted to show here how that lip is, and that's why I use the extra race to kind of push it down and countersink the new race in. You can see how it fits on the inside of the pinion support, inside that little gap on both sides. You can see it really good right here. And you can see how flush the races sit on the back side of that ridge inside the pinion support. And I've stored away the old races for future projects. So then, using my bench vise and a set of soft jaws, I put the pinion in there to kind of hold it steady while I start assembling it all together. The next thing is the crush sleeve, which this is like a factory one that comes in the set, and solid spacers can be used. It's a whole process of finding out the depth you need and then putting a solid spacer, but I just went ahead with a crush sleeve that came in the kit. Then I put on the top bearing, and you can see it's gonna be really hard to get all that pressed in. So when you add the pinion, you'll see how far down that goes. It's not gonna go. And there's this whole process of having to like crush it down and test it. So I seen on, I believe it was Bleeping Jeep, where they took this pinion nut, and you can see right here that it'd just not go down all the way. So this top part right here won't let it go past, and it kind of starts to tear up the thread. So the top part that's rounded off is kind of like a tapered part. I'm gonna have to cut straight off, and you can see right here what I'll do. It's the old pinion nut, and I'm just gonna remove the rounded edge. What I did was just take an angle grinder, and I kind of just cut straight across and just took that top part off. You could see here, it works out pretty good. And here's a shot of the little rounded taper part that I took off. And now you can see how easily the nut goes on the pinion without getting bound up or anything. It just spins on and off. That was a great little trick. And it's very helpful because you have to take this thing on and off several times by the end of all of this. Once again, luckily I have a press. So what I did was I actually put it on my press to get it started. So the thing with the crush sleeve is that it is super hard to get started. But once you get it started, I guess it's very easy to over crush it. So all I'm doing here is basically trying to get it started, and I'm going really slow and constantly checking the pressure and making sure everything turns. Soon as I feel that it has some resistance to it, that's where I stopped and took it back to my vise. Now that I believe I got it started and I have it placed back in my bench vise, I can put the old pinion nut that I cut the top off and start to adjust the pressure on it. Using a breaker bar and a 1 1/16 inch socket, I secured just the pinion yoke in the vise to where you can still spin the pinion support, and I start to try and tighten the nut. It takes a lot of pressure, but every time I started to feel it turn, I would stop and just check to see how it was turning. I sometimes even had to use a bar over the breaker bar for some more leverage because it was that hard to turn the pinion nut sometimes. And I just kept doing that, slowly turning a little at a time until I thought I felt it starting to crush, and then I had to stop. So then the next thing you want to do is actually hold the pinion support with the vise, and you're going to have to take a torque wrench with inch pounds on it, which I will put a link to in the description below. In order to use this, you got to go from 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch to your 1/2 inch socket. I know it sounds weird, but it actually works pretty good. So then what you do is you put that on the pinion nut and you turn it and you see what the drag is in inch pounds. So everywhere I looked said the pinion nut torque setting on used bearings is anywhere between 13 to 15 inch pounds, and new bearings are anywhere between 20 to 25 inch pounds. So with that in mind, I just kept going back and forth from pinion to pinion support, slowly moving forward, testing and retesting until I thought it was close. By the way, there's a site called DIY Ford that has a lot of really good information on rebuilding a Ford 9-inch third member. I recommend checking that out. So then finally I was turning the torque wrench and I hit 20. And that's where I stop for now. So here's the thing. Now that it's at the right setting, it has to be disassembled. The pinion nut has to come back off so that the oil slinger and seal can now be put in. Now that it's ready for final assembly, I just put a little bit more gear oil down in the bearing. Then I reinstall the oil slinger, making sure that's seated flat. Now comes time for the pinion seal, and it's said that by putting some white lithium grease on the inside where the actual pinion goes is a really good idea. It's good from keeping it from leaking and also operating properly. So I just applied it on the inside and went all the way around. Now comes the outside. So this is where a lot of leaks come from. So I took a tube of ultra black gasket maker and I just went all the way around the outside of that until it was nice and filled, and then I flattened it out to get it ready to install. After getting that ready, it was actually time to install the seal. And these things can be a bit tricky. They're hard to start and they will bend very easy. So it takes a lot of patience, and just as you can see, I would just take my time and with a very small hammer, literally just lightly tap on it until I can get it started. And then once it got started, I just try to evenly work it all the way around until it sat nice and flat. So I actually wanted to leave this whole part in. I sped it up a little bit because it does take a while, but I just wanted to show how long it took me to do it, just taking my time. And there was a time where it even looked like it was gonna go in super crooked, but I just kept going really slow and even taking time to clean it up here and there, and just going back to tapping it and spinning it, tapping it, spinning it. And then finally it got to a point where it started to look like it was getting really evened out, and I eventually was happy with it, and it looked like it sat really flat. And then you can kind of even just hear the difference in the sound of the hammer as it flattens out and bottoms out on the metal of the pinion support. Then finally I added the pinion, which you just gotta line up the splines and it'll kind of just drop in, and then push it in to where it feels nice and seated. I also went ahead and put some of the gasket maker around the pinion before I put the pinion nut in, because I heard that was actually a really good idea and it keeps it from leaking through the pinion nut as well. I will add a link to the gasket maker and the lithium grease in the description down below. Then the last thing to go on is the new pinion nut, which actually has the thread sealant on it. And this is why you don't want to use that for the mock-up, because it's single use. So once you put it on, you gotta leave it on. If you loosen it, you break the thread lock on it. And just run the nut down as far as you can. So now I basically did the same process as before, going back and forth from the pinion to the pinion support until I reached the proper torque setting, because this will be the final time. And as you can see here on the torque wrench, my setting got to just about 25 inch-pounds, which is perfect for a new bearing. And last but not least, I replaced the pinion support O-ring, which I will put some white lithium grease on later when I'm installing it on the third member. On my next video, I'm going to switch gears a bit and I'm going to actually narrow the 9-inch housing. If you found this video helpful, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. And as always, thanks for watching.